get pieces of it, like if you go out into like we were outside with it, but it's just like, man, I mean, North Carolina is I like my job. The people I work with are very familiar with the job. I have no doubt that I'll keep the job. Even if I don't think I'm doing it good sometimes, everyone is always like, so it's a good thing. Well, because it is a weird scenario. It's like, I don't know what success is supposed to look like. Is it supposed to be that everyone is now capable of using email, and that's practical? Or is it that everyone should have a networking degree? The networking degree is not practical. And sometimes I try to pursue it as the higher success one, and it's like, in North Carolina, it's messed up with it's weird because the way they set it up in the community colleges, they break it down what would essentially be 8 years of math into 8 4-week courses. 4-week courses, you take 4 a semester. Yeah. They go every day.
Yeah, it's like summer session.
Yeah, like summer session constantly, but then it's usually with people who's just like, you know, they're developmental or they're already behind and they're much self-taught. So it's a situation where it's just like, a lot of them don't have the necessary study skills because they never developed them, and that's why they're in the development setup. And because they're in the scenario right now, so they're self-taught, and they're just like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so they'll just sort of fail one over and over again, and it's sort of assumed that they're going to fail at least once. And so it's just kind of like, before they can take courses, they literally have to do 16 math courses that one year college have. And that bothers me for someone who likes math, teaches math, but also, now everyone's just going to hate it, but also it's just like, this is so unofficial. Yeah. 2 more minutes.
Check.
Yellow.
Check one. Syllabus.
Can you hear me?
Alright. We all ready to go? Sure.
Ready as we'll ever be.
Alright.
I feel good.
See.
Leave a seat for a little bit.
Make sure. Okay. Hey everybody.
Hey everybody, how's everyone doing today? Woo! Everyone enjoying MagFest?
Yeah!
Any first timers? Always great to see. So this is the Politics of Games. My name is Tim McNeil, I'm the coordinator of Mages, and I'm going to be the moderator for this panel, but I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves after that. So.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Yeah, morning. Well, technically, for me it is. Good morning. I am Elisa Melendez. I am a PhD candidate, feels so good to say, at Florida International University in Miami, Florida, and my dissertation research focuses on gender in video games, but specifically the Rock Band franchise and Rocksmith. Woo!
My name is Bob Chipman. I host the Game Overthinker on Blip, Escape to the Movies on escapistmagazine.com, and The Big Picture on the same website. I am also the author of Super Mario Bros. 3 Brick by Brick, the novelized Let's Play, which is available for sale wherever you find me on the floor today.
My name is Lindsay Grace. Can you guys hear me, or do you need a mic? Can you hear me? No. Okay, all right, I'll go with the mic. Okay, so I'm actually going to run through a slide deck just to give you sort of a basis of some of the sort of view I have on politics and games. I'm an associate professor at American University. I've just come to DC about 3 months ago. And I also head a Persuasive Play studio at American. So I'm going to start by saying that games are political, and I'm going to give you some examples. And I'm also going to tell you right now that games need to be political. Okay? So let's talk about games being political. Anyone recognize this game? Hell yeah. Okay, so let's talk about all the inherent politics in this one. Right? So in life, we have things like the station wagon you must have, and the 2.5 children you must fill it with, and the fact that you must have a heterosexual relationship, blah, 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 right? And so we can also talk about this model of war, in which you win war by getting the king, and the rest of the political rhetoric, the rest of the political argument is that no one else matters, it's just about the king. We could talk about, has anyone seen this movie?
Yes.
We can talk about game theory, right? We can talk about this guy, Mr. Nash, and his equilibrium. In his equilibrium, we basically understand that there's always a sort of perpetual balance, and we've used our political machine, for lack of a better phrase, to perpetuate this. So we put people into stalemates. We do this sort of approach that is really a game theory approach. Or the prisoner's dilemma, for anyone who studied game design. And all of these things result in a kind of, what was popular in the 1980s, a mutually assured destruction, right? We basically tell people the best way to prevent a nuclear apocalypse is to go ahead and stock up as many weapons as the other guy, so that we keep each other in check. We also produce games, so companies like this one produce a game that's against welfare, the public assistance game, which is full of this rhetoric around why we shouldn't have public assistance. Or games around capital punishment. In this particular game, you have one of 4 characters, a murderer, a rapist, an arsonist, and a kidnapper, and it's designed to help you understand how you can avoid capital punishment. So think about the very strong political intonation in that. And then we have things like Civilization, mainstream games that have a particular view about what makes a society civilized. And we have the rhetoric and the arguments and things like what Tom Clancy constructs, right? So these Tom Clancy games that talk about a third world needing saving, etc. And I think games do need to be political. I don't necessarily endorse any of the games that I just showed, but I do think it's important to understand that games are innately political and they need to be. And some people have embraced this. So the Howard Dean game, has anyone ever played this? This is Howard Dean for Iowa. This was actually done by a famous academic. Or has anyone ever played September 12th?
I've played that before.
Very cool, very cool. So September 12th, for those of you who don't know it, is a game about terrorism. So the idea in this game, it's more of a toy than a game, is that you can see a terrorist, fire a missile at the terrorist. If you fire a missile at the terrorist, you will destroy them. But what happens next is that you produce terrorists from the other people who were affected by that missile. So you end up in a sort of losing game because you're perpetually making the situation worse, not better. And one of the groups that does a really good job of this is La Mole Industria. Their games are things like The Best Amendment. Anyone ever play this one? The fascinating thing about this is it's basically a shooter, white hood against black hood, but at the end of the day, you find that you're playing against yourself. So as you shoot the next level, you're actually shooting AI that's structured on exactly what you did in the last round. So the game becomes unwinnable because you're constantly fighting yourself. Or Phone Story, which was rejected by Apple after being accepted, which does, in part, how our smartphones are made. And the situation behind making smartphones is not very palatable. So in this particular example, this is a level where you're trying to catch Chinese manufacturers, people who work in the factory, who are jumping out of the building because this was a problem. Very strong politics, right? Or you're mining precious minerals in a country where you have essentially slave labor. Mole Industria does very radical political games, very strong. So Oligarchy is about owning your own oil business and ruling the world through oil. Or Pedo Priest, you can kind of figure that one out. Or Papers, Please, which is a really good example of trying to impart empathy and help us understand the ambiguity that exists in these spaces. Or Brenda Brathwaite's Train. Are you guys familiar with this one? It's often academic cited. This is a game that the simplest way to describe it, and it's a spoiler alert, is it's a game where you're loading people into trains trying to win, and you kind of realize what you're doing is you're loading them into a destination like Auschwitz. So it's an aha moment to get you thinking critically about the rules of play. And then I do a lot of this work as well. So last week, I do a lot of my games within 1 to 2 days. So I did this game in a day, and it's what would happen if a pitfall adventurer had to deal with insurance. So what happens is, as you play, you have to, you initially select the kind of insurance do you want. Do you want affordable care? Or do you want to go with the existing policies? Do you want to skip insurance entirely? So in this screenshot, what happens is you've developed dysentery, and then you try and get a claim. It's a nod to Oregon Trail. And what happens is you then get your claim denied and you're billed anyway. So the game is lost because you lose your money, because you just don't have any more money to finish your adventure. And then I did a game years ago under a different practice I call social activist games. And this one was Arizona Justice. It's against SB State Bill 1070, which basically allowed people to discriminate, the cops, the police, to discriminate based on someone's appearance. And so this game is practice doing just that. You're trying to find illegal immigrants based on their appearance. And then Healer, which is a game about the Nanjing Massacre, which is rarely discussed, but is basically an atrocity that occurred between Japan and China during World War II. And in this game, what happens is you're actually, instead of killing people and redoing the atrocity, you're undoing the atrocity. Everyone's dead, and you're trying to make them come alive. And then I have a Hall of Fame game in Games for Change that's just about helping people stop and smell the flowers. And all of this is to help you understand where I'm coming from, which is, as the director of the American University Games Initiative, we'll be doing a lot of political games. That's all. And then there looks like there's already a question.
So a lot right there.
Boy, I'm glad somebody. I am so glad somebody came prepared. I did.
So, any questions so far?
I was gonna
Start right there and then right there.
I was gonna go with the Nanjing angle. Probably the most famous of the deniers is Koji Sugiyama. Do you think he deserves contempt for that?
I don't know enough about the politics to comment.
Okay. Because he pretty much denies it all, any wrongdoing whatsoever about that. And he's probably the most famous one, so, but I understand.
When I published the game, I got a lot of deniers, the way that we give Holocaust deniers, who were very upset about it. And that's part of the reason you make these games, to raise awareness.
What
Yeah,
here?
the SB 1070, I think it was called. Is that a real law?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And in Arizona, which is why it's called Arizona Justice.
Yeah, so everyone's not familiar with the law. Basically, the law said that you could be stopped if you were thought to be an illegal immigrant. And so, since it's Arizona, people who are thought to be immigrants are people who are Hispanic.
More like
And it basically
Arizona
says
injustice.
police can harass Hispanic people legally.
Yeah.
More like Arizona injustice.
Right. Well, the irony is Arizona's done. Right. Yeah.
Okay. So one thing I want to comment on what Luce was talking about is, you mentioned a lot of games that are overtly political.
Yep.
These are games made for the purpose of being political. Do you think there are more games that are political that don't mean to be? Or, that it's a much more covert?
Yes.
All right, what are some ones that you would say? So you say all of them, Lisa.
Well, also, I sort of mentioned this if you were here for how studying games affected you as a gamer. Sort of depending on how it is that you kind of have your lens trained to look at things, I sort of comment about how being, ass deep in sociology for the last, 5 years or whatever, it sort of trained me to actually look at games and sort of see interpretations that could be quite interesting, including Animal Crossing, which I sort of mentioned yesterday, which was, I want to be able to just sort of shake a tree and get fruit and be happy about it, but I can't, because you could see a kind of a really sort of strong kind of class element there. You build your house and you have your room, but it's not enough. And as soon as you pay off your room, you need another room, or you need to make that room bigger, and you need money in order to do that. And it's the sort of entire goal is to not only acquire wealth, but the game also encourages you to acquire things and then show off those things to other people. So hooray, conspicuous consumption, and I just want to shake a tree and go listen to, like KK Slider's set for like a second, but you can really sort of see how these things can be read, with kind of interesting political undertones, which can kind of change the way that you look and view and play through a game.
How many games do you shop in? Millions, billions, tons. Like anything with an item acquisition has get money, buy the item. There's entire political systems that say that very act is immoral in and of itself. So you can't run away from this stuff.
I always think it's an interesting one, actually. Anyone played The World Ends With You?
Yes.
I never understood what it was like to being a Japanese teenager until I played that game. And everything about it's like, you gotta make trends, you gotta make your friends like you, then go buy some ramen. You gotta make people like you, you gotta change all these trends, you gotta spend money and get people to like you. And that's like how you win the game, that's how you get everything.
So I'm coming from a design perspective, and one of the arguments that I make all the time is that we lack a critical distance in the things we design. What we do is we integrate all of our personal experiences or all of our worldviews into the end product, and we say this will be engaging or this will work. And we all kind of know that some of this rears its head because we've played games that are out of our comfort zone for one reason or another, and we tend to just say, well, that's a different culture, instead of asking ourselves the inherent politics that are within that.
Any questions? I saw a beard first, and then you.
What about games that are made, like a lot of games these days are made by enormous studios with hundreds of people involved. And so is there really any sort of personal politics sleeping in there beyond what the corporate entity that's putting them out wants to or accepts in there because they're being produced by this enormous team?
Yes. So I look at it this way. We know that there are politics from government, which is an enormous system, but there's still a general charge. Everything from making sure that you end up on the shelves that you need to be. So allowing, there are certain things you can't sell at, say, a Walmart. So you just drop them from your game. There are political systems in effect at sort of all times when we are trying to produce something for an audience. End of story in my view.
I agree.
One of the things that I'm very interested in, in games is the overt politics. For example, you have BioShock, where it was basically a libertarian type of stuff. Is it possible to have any other, or are there any games out there that discuss any other type of political or other type of other stuff like say communism, socialism, or capital? All this. We already have capitalism, but other type of things. Just want to ask that. Are there?
Who played Gorilla on the NES ever? NES, I believe, was also Commodore 64. Okay. Who was the protagonist of Gorilla?
Rambo.
Yes, in this game, they changed it for the U.S. manual. You play this game as Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. It's shit. It's not a good game. It's an Ikari Warriors knockoff, but it is supposed to be Che Guevara and Fidel Castro overthrowing Cuba. Understandably, this was changed in the U.S., but it was released uncut in Japan.
Another good example, if you want one, is Chris Crawford's Balance of Power. Very overt, very clear.
Who was first?
Who was first?
I think he was.
Sean. Okay, Sean.
Okay. Well, of course, games have politics, so does most media. In your opinion, what would you say are the games that have had the most detrimental effects in terms of the politics they express?
So I'll go with some low-hanging fruit first, personally. So Mortal Kombat, Grand Theft Auto, because we've had to fight a political machine to help people understand that games are valuable because they immediately see this thing and they say this is representative of the whole and oh my god, you people all are evil and all.
I think that's a positive, actually.
Sorry?
I think that was actually a positive. It shows that we actually are, it shows that the people want to have the rights and such. It just does not, I don't see something like Mortal Kombat as again, something that's negative or something like that. It just shows that those people in the White House and all this.
It's the latest in a series.
It's the latest.
You need to be smacked.
Remember heavy metal, rap music?
All comic books, movies, books. Interesting.
I think that's been blasting. I'm not thinking about it.
So I think something that's to address here is oftentimes whenever there's new media, it gets labeled as the evil thing that's corrupting the youth.
Professional wrestling.
Yeah, oh, these are and the argument you're making there, I think some people are equating that you're saying that about a Grand Theft Auto. Do you agree?
No, I actually don't think that Grand Theft Auto or Mortal Kombat are evil. I love them, and still love them. And I should mention too that I'm not speaking for American University. I'm just speaking for myself.
Nice.
But you asked the question of sort of what's been detrimental. One of the things that I've had to, one of the earlier panel was on education, and one of the things that I've had to fight is I believe wholeheartedly in the power of games, and people who don't believe wholeheartedly in the power of games want to take these examples out and say, listen, they've been beneficial in that it's raised awareness,
right.
And gotten people talking about it, but you also have to fight the sort of challenge.
Well, you took the low-hanging fruit. I'm just going to kick the tree then. And you say, so what's detrimental? 3 words: Call of Duty.
Oh!
Sounds like not
the shots fired.
Not that they're bad games. Some of them are. Ghosts was. But in the sense that because this one franchise got so big so fast, became the thing that multiplayer online exists for, on consoles at least, the entire shooter genre is basically developmentally arrested right now, despite the fact that we're now in 2014 and the whole genre still revolves around a immediate post-9/11 revenge fantasy.
All right, something on the Black Hat first. This is a while ago.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I grew up playing Phantasy Star 2, Final Fantasy 7, things like that. And inherently, the major enemy is the central government. It's sort of like a big, entity that's sort of controlling all the aspects of life, mother brain, things like that. Do you think that helps mold political perspectives of children that were growing up then? I know it did for me, partially, because I teach politics as well. So I'm just curious what you guys think about that.
So I'm a big proponent of procedural rhetoric, and I think that, in short, the more we play games, the more we practice, and the resolution that games provide, so the ability to solve a specific problem through a game is kind of a practice in resolving it that particular way. I can tell you that I've got a lot of interest in being a Lone Ranger because I looked at people like Han Solo when I was a kid and said, man, I want to be that dude. And so playing it as a game is sort of that next order, right? If we're talking about the medium itself, you're experiencing it and you're getting positive feedback and you're actually doing. So I believe in procedural rhetoric, so I would say I believe, sure, it's going to affect your politics and your view of sort of how things should work if they don't work that way.
And I agree. I think that, whenever there's, and then sort of the way that I try to teach my undergrads about agents of socialization and the way that, you think that socialization only happens when you're like 4, and then it stops. It's a constant process, and whenever you enter a virtual world, that virtual world, is its own society with its own set of norms and regulations and values, and, I love using the sort of Grand Theft Auto Online tutorial in order to show that, because it's like, no, yell at this clerk in order to, make him put the money in the bag faster.
Or just shoot around the place.
Or just shoot around him, but, it tells you to sort of yell, and it's kind of interesting the way that when you're playing online and you hear other people on the microphone, you could literally yell anything and still have it work, but people will still sort of get into kind of that character. Like I could literally yell, cow, milk, udder, football, cyclops, and it would still work, but you still have that sort of like, I mean, if I yell cyclops, it'd probably work really, really well, but, you're sort of socialized into this sort of game world and the kind of social norms and values, and that, that would, it's a part of the mass media, and it is a strong agent of socialization.
The single-player experience is inherently radically individualist, because you are all, by its very nature, it is one against a system. It's only natural that narratives would grow out of that. But every culture projects their own stuff onto it. Japan has always had a centralized government. They went from being a monarchy to a feudal system to a dictatorship to a fairly social democracy in that way. So a lot of Japanese games still are anti-system, just because how else do you just design a game other than one against the system?
In the back, and then in the red, and then in the green, and then in the white, and then standing up.
Oh my. You guys have been talking a lot about different explicit political systems of games and implicit political systems of games, stuff that's done on purpose and stuff that just kind of happens through the process. To what extent do you think it is or should be explicit?
So I might misunderstanding the question, but the slide deck I went through was a bunch of explicit decisions, right? So
Do you think it should be that way?
I think it depends on what you're trying to do. So from my perspective as someone who runs a Persuasive Play studio, I think it often should be explicit. And I think it should be explicit because it should be forthcoming. I believe in that statement at the end of a political message that says this was or was not endorsed by a specific person, because I think it's important for people to understand that. Very few people are critical enough of their media to understand those differences. And so I think, and this is going to sound I think it's very important to be explicit, to be honest.
And I guess sort of one of the kind of important things that I always strive for, I don't know necessarily about explicit, implicit. I just want sort of games to be more, people that make games to be more aware of the content that they're putting out and the sort of privilege that they have to create these virtual worlds and sort of send different messages. And sort of my focus is on gender clearly, but on all sorts of other factors. You need to be aware of the kind of stuff that you're putting out there to consume, the way that you're sort of socializing the gamers into your particular world, and what that could potentially mean. Don't just sort of be like, oh, but it's just a game. You can't sort of say it's just a game, it doesn't matter, and then hey, this game is art, it matters. You can't sort of have it both ways.
And go in the red, and then green, white, guy standing up on the board. Yeah.
How can you say parody is effective in video games themselves? How would you say that it affects political systems? Because sometimes people do not get the parody, or sometimes it goes over their heads.
So I understand the question. Are you talking about games that are themselves explicitly parodies, games that use humor as part of their narrative?
Well, it could either be subtle, but yeah, sometimes parodies can have a very political message in them. Some games. Yes, I think parody is an important part of any literature culture, and I think video games also do have that in them. So,
I guess I'll say yes. Again, so I agree. No, I mean, realistically, I support parody in games. I support parody in television. I love comedy. Yes. And I guess I'm asking, what is this particular question? Like, do we think it has a place? Do we think it?
Yeah, does it have a place?
Yes. I think, to give you a little more of a response, honestly, the challenge is that because games have an extra layer of consumption, so it's not just sit back, it's participate, it is sometimes more complicated to understand parody or satire or any of the more sort of advanced structures, but I think they have a place, and I've seen some successes. Fate Fighter's a good one, Mole Industrial.
And I think there's also maybe a kind of something to be said about the distinction about punching up instead of sort of punching down.
Yes.
And that's sort of where people could get kind of lost, like the idea of like maybe a what was it, Faith Fighter?
Yep.
Or like Arizona Justice, like this sort of idea that you're kind of like using it to kind of speak upon the people in power, oppressive systems, etc., versus sort of, kicking the subjugated while they're already down, and, but it's parody. It's like, that's our everyday lives, though, so it's not exactly funny. So there is, sort of some distinction to be made there. But, I sort of like that idea. Let's stop talking about the Citizen Kane of games. I want to see the Weird Al of games. Yeah, let's make that happen.
I think parody is sometimes too much of a crutch. At least from a design standpoint, because it's very easy, especially right now, to set out and make the most tacky, intentionally offensive, punching down sort of thing that you could make. Like, people say, oh, well, we've moved on today because Custer's Revenge would never get made today. Which, for those of you who are not familiar, was the Atari game where you play as zombie Custer raping Native American women. This is a real game.
Yep.
It was released and sold in stores. It wasn't like homebrewed. That game would get made today, and it would get thrown out onto download platforms. The only difference is when someone called them on it, they would turn around and say, no, you don't understand. I'm making fun of bad taste. No, you're not. Fuck you.
So, you've had your hand up for a bit?
Yeah.
And then you
Here's the real question about video games. You got parents and politicians complain about violent video games, yet we don't hear the same complaints when the children watch violent films or television shows. We don't hear much complaints about it at all.
We did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just because, well, not only games are the sort of new hotness, but I think it's also the level of interactivity that I think sort of places it at a different level. You're sort of being a character instead of, watching other people do stuff. You're actually kind of, complicit in the violence that you're enacting on screen, which makes sense. But, it's a sort of the same tired story, as part of my research. I talk a lot about the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Center, and sort of their tirade in the 80s against music and music videos, sort of like post-MTV.
Yeah, and do you know the worst thing? These same politicians don't have time to watch television. They don't have time to watch those violent materials. Yet they complain about things that never experienced or never played through. Because if they did, it would shadow their whole ideology.
I think that the point is exactly that this has happened before. People have censored books without reading them because they got the gist of them.
Yep.
This is a problem.
When Gutenberg invented the printing press, one of the excuses for banning having the written word be available to the masses, was that common people need to have things filtered for them, because if they just read it themselves, it's going to jumble up their brains, they're going to get crazy, and we have to handle that. When movies were new, the excuse to regulate them for being too violent was because the moving picture is too real and people won't be able to disassociate themselves from real life. This happens with every new medium. As soon as you get enough people into elected office and whatnot who grew up on Nintendo and Sega and playing games on their computer and stuff, who there won't be as much moral panic about it until someone makes Custer's Revenge.
Yeah, the problem is that video games is going to be like in the same position for a long time, because technology, when it comes to interactivity and entertainment, is currently at dead end. So video games are going to be stuck like this, getting the short end of the stick for a long time. And it's great, so.
I'm glad someone's more of a pessimist than I am.
Stay positive. We're educating an entire room full of people that are going to go out and be games academics and then lobby in Congress and kick some butt, right?
Sure. They're just going to shove a PR letter, a form letter to you, saying, just piss off. We got your money, we got your votes, fuck you, got mine.
Damn the man.
Let's go to the next question.
Well, that was nice.
Well, just to follow up on what you're saying about how politicians, not understanding violent material, if they were really against violence, they should probably take a look at what the U.S. government's doing overseas. But I digress. Anyway, speaking of warfare, you mentioned the Call of Duty series earlier. We've seen sort of a rise in modern military shooters. I mean, you compare to what the shoot-'em-ups were in the 90s. We had Doom, we had Quake, we had Blood, we had Duke Nukem, we had Redneck Rampage, and all these other ones. The average one. Redneck Rampage is a real game, but we had all these ones. Nowadays, though, the FPS genre has been dominated by what is called the modern military shooter that just sort of glorifies war and the military industrial complex. You know, we have people who hold these positions. From what I read an article by John Whitehead, I believe. One of the people who made this game, America's Army, now serves as a developer on one company or something. What is your take on the dominance of the modern military shooter and the message it sends to people these days that just sort of glorifies warfare for what it is?
So the first thing we have to emphasize so everybody understands it is America's Army was a Army initiative that essentially serves as a recruiting station for future military personnel. I'd also like to underscore that it isn't all politicians, right, that are opposed to games or that are critical of games. I'd also say that you're right in your concern, and one of the things we often forget about the history of games is that a lot of our computer graphics research and a lot of our interest in simulation came from that military complex, right? So we were building flight simulators that later turned into fun flight simulators, but we were trying to save money, and we were doing CAD because it was cheaper than producing something and finding out it's the wrong dimensions. And so what's interesting is there is a history in games in the military, but there is also a history in science fiction. Because the individuals who were working on Space War at MIT decided to make something that was about space. And the interesting thing, and this is just speculative, is the fact that if it is moving in that direction, if we're really seeing a military move, you have to ask yourself if that's consumer-driven or producer-driven.
I'd like to say it's a mixture of both. And given the fact that we have quotes from politicians like Lyndon Johnson, John McCain, Colin Powell.
Yep. And Yasser Arafat's in there as well.
Yasser Arafat. Is Netanyahu in there?
Yeah, he is.
I think Netanyahu's in there too, and I think there are quotes from some of the Clintons as well. Yeah, I'd like to say that it's a double-edged sword that cuts both ways.
I'm going to use a word that I hate using this phrase, is the perfect storm. Sometimes two things just happen at the same time, but it is, since you mentioned Call of Duty again, I don't think that at all would have happened if the ability to actually make realistic gun physics, very realistic. The reason first-person shooters and games in general were so unusual in the 80s and 90s is because it was easier with limited graphics to create fantasy than it was to create reality. That's the uncanny valley and all of that. It is unfortunate, in my view, that the ability to make realistic military games as a thing to do happened at exactly the same time when the West was back into a shooting war for the first time in a couple of decades, into a large-scale military operational shooting war, that suddenly it was what people saw on TV, and that eventually bleeds into what you want to see in your entertainment.
And given everything that you hear coming out of the Army, all of the rise in military suicides, the rise of antidepressant use by soldiers, the rise of sexual assaults as well.
I'm in the military. I do not hear, and I hear far too much of that. It is depressing.
Yeah, I would not. Being in the Army is not something that I would want to glorify, because given all of the stories I heard, and so is he.
Phrase that.
I'm sorry. I don't. Yeah,
it's not all that.
You see what I'm getting at.
So this is a good time to say, if you were developing a game, then you would have that kind of rhetoric in your game, but there are plenty of people who would have another rhetoric that would support military initiatives. And so it's like useful for us to understand, or even to empathize, which is one of the things I think we in my personal opinion, have too little of. We have plenty of the sort of stoic military sim. We don't have enough of the, and this is the tough stuff you have to deal with after serving or during serving.
Wasn't Spec Ops the line?
Spec Ops is.
Yes. General theme of that?
Yes.
Spec Ops is third TVs.
Yes, that is.
Let's move on to another question to give everyone a chance for it. You were next over there, and then we'll do you in the corner. So, yeah.
That actually segues into what I wanted to ask about. Francois Truffaut said it's impossible to make a really anti-war movie. I guess, I like to let people comment on TV tropes. So I was right as a trope. It's hard because
avoiding conflict is not, I mean, in a movie you want to see things, it's an entertainment medium, you want to see things blow up, you want to see things happen. Avoiding conflict doesn't make for a good movie. And even more so in games, how can you make a truly anti-war game? Spec Ops: The Line tried to do that, but a lot of reviewers, when it first came out, said, you know, this is not a very fun game to play. And a lot of
the point.
how when you're trying to entertain people, attention, people, you know, AAA studios make games people want to buy because it's fun, it's exciting, it makes you feel good, feel like a hero. How do you know, engage that critical faculty? Is it always going to be that anyone who wants to make you look at the tough stuff is going to be lagging behind in the market just because games are supposed to be fun?
Well, it depends on how we define fun, right? So part of the challenge here is that for some of us, these political games are the real fun because they have this extrinsic value and they give you new perspective and all that sort of stuff. The other side to look at it is to just understand as a game designer that if you're going to build from the premise that conflict is essential for the game, think about anything you experienced as a child when you built a Lego toy and then someone crushed it. The rhetoric in that example, you hate that person for crushing it, but you're going to think, what if I make a game about construction and the evil, the thing I'm always battling is the thing that's constantly destroying?
I don't think it's, when people use the words war and military interchangeably, and it's not fair, and it doesn't, it muddies up the discussion. It's entirely possible to make anti-war, anti-whatever things, and be successful and have them be there, with apologies to Mr. Truffaut. MASH, which was a movie and then a TV show that ran for the show MASH is set in the Korean War. It lasted 2 years longer than the actual Korean War.
And it was a way of talking about parody. It was a way of discussing Vietnam.
And it was funny, and people watched it, and people really enjoyed it. And the premise of that show was not war is hell, it was war is annoying. You know, war is that, you know, it sucks sometimes to be stuck in this situation and the mundanity that you have to do. It's not all, you know, battlefield glory. A lot of it is tough and hard and, you know, kicks your ass. So, you know, people say, should we make anti-military games? I would say, why? You know, military is a neutral thing. You know, it can be good, it can be evil. Most of the time, it's a job.
Yep. Especially with our modern technology.
Indeed.
Sit in front of the computer.
You in the corner first, and then you in the third.
I have a totally different question. So every once in a while, I come across a game that I think of as being completely unpolitical, like Tetris. And then I go and I look at how other companies, like when EA bought Tetris, they started making it a game where you could, you know, buy different things. They did their Galaxy Tetris series, and suddenly you had to buy levels and do different things. And that, to me, muddied it because it suddenly made it political and commercial. How do you feel, and do you have any commentary on making such games and such children's games and things, and bringing in, I don't know, the commercial atmosphere and perhaps making it more political with other agendas? How do you feel? I guess really my question is, have games become more political with time? Or is this just something that sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't?
I don't know that I would say that it's tricky. So more political is almost vague in itself.
Political, yeah.
Right, so there's the challenge. I would, there, yeah, there isn't, I mean, there really, this is, I'm hesitant to give a strong response or even to make a claim around that because, you know, part of what I think you're saying is that as we make the game more rich, so we go from something that is highly representational to something that is more literal, are we embodying it with more politic? And I would say that really depends, and that's a very gray space I don't want to make any claims on.
We've all played Missile Command, right?
Yes.
Do you know the guy who made Missile Command? He created Missile Command as a thought experiment, political idea. The point of Missile Command is that you can't win Missile Command. You know, this guy, he was.
I remember that extra credits episode.
Yeah, James Portnow, who just had a panel in here earlier, he is part of a show called Extra Credits. If you go and look it up on YouTube, Extra Credits, Missile Command, it's a fascinating story.
Again, blue shirts. And, yeah.
Yeah. What up, cheap seats?
My question is about gender representation in games.
Hey.
Last year, Rudy and I had a long discussion on this topic based on watching a Lisa Giesian's Kickstarter video, where I was sort of saying that this was an issue, and he was sort of saying, you know, why it wasn't. And the discussion went for a long time, and then basically, me getting frustrated, him not saying, and him saying, there was no way as a consumer to really affect representation in games. This was something that consumers as a whole would affect economically, and that would just happen over time. Where I was saying more, there was some kind of way to like change it in an activism, perhaps, or other ways. Do you think there is any way, as a single individual, outside of maybe buying more games that are more better representation of gender, to affect this sort of imbalance that we see in the industry right now?
All right. I gotta stretch. Hold on. All right. So, what the sort of main takeaway that I want you all to sort of take away and then spread it like wildfire is that the personal is political, right? And keep that in your head, right? The personal is political. Every decision that you make, everything that you buy, every piece of clothes that you wear, every wig that you put on, right? The hair dye that you place or not place, the beard that you wear or not wear, the leg that you shave or don't shave, the afro that you pick out or use hair straightener on, right? You know, all of these decisions can have a really, really strong effect. And it could be something as simple as you sort of buying the game that you like that is a representation of something, and then playing it with your friend and seeing, this is why this game is really, really cool. Or, you know, word of mouth is really awesome. Social media is you know, a sort of great way to kind of spread the word, because if I sort of, you know, would have kind of hung out in my kind of like single console universe and not sort of use this sort of awesome word of mouth thing that we have with like Twitter and Facebook and all of that jazz, you know, maybe we wouldn't have heard of something like Gone Home, right? Or Minecraft, or Depression Quest, or Dysphoria, you know, all of these sorts of things. And, you know, I think that, you know, there is, I don't, and I tell this to my students all the time, and I, you know, sort of leave them with this like super rah-rah boom-bah message, but power isn't something that one system has that you don't have, and that only they can give you. Power is something that can be negotiated through everyday interaction, right? Every single act, every single action that you have with somebody, even if, you know, if it's online and somebody uses a slur, somebody harasses somebody else, your decision to say, hey, that's not cool, or your decision to not say anything at all, that is a political act, right? So, there are all sorts of ways in everyday interaction that you can help affect change. And you as somebody who may not necessarily, you know, or maybe you are, who knows, I don't know, we'll talk about it. You know, be part of a sort of demographic that is, you know, kind of marginalized in this case. If you are not part of that demographic, if you are privileged enough to, you know, not be part of the marginalized demographic, it's not just up to us to be the ones that constantly get angry, and then we get yelled at for being angry, but sorry, this sucks, and we get angry, you know? Like things like the civil rights movement didn't happen over, you know, tea and crumpets, right? You know, people had to get angry, right? People have to, you know, this sucks. People get angry. So it's not just up to the marginalized to get angry and yell about it, it is also, you know, you having the privilege to be believed over maybe somebody else who is marginalized. You can't stay quiet because it doesn't affect you. Because odds are, you will know somebody who's affected by it. And if you can't have empathy for that person who is affected by it, even though you're not affected by it, then it sucks to be.
So the thing that I've been championing for years is just the independent game space. So I think of things like Matty Bryce's Minichi, like these games that are very much about embracing. I wouldn't even say like it's almost demeaning to say a counterculture, but just basically embracing other perspectives and championing them. I think a lot of the independent games movement, for lack of a better word, has a lot to do with people saying this doesn't exist and I want it to exist, so I'm going to do it. And I think that's what's so sort of inspiring and exciting to me. You'll notice all the examples I gave you were independent games, because those are the ones that really raised an eyebrow for me. And part of it is, I think someone had asked before about this idea that you have many people building a game, and so there's a sort of communal effort, so where do the politics go? And I think what's interesting about these independent games is they're so sharp and so cutting and so clear. They get right to the point. You only have 5 minutes of maybe gameplay. And those 5 minutes can be more resonant than the 30 minutes I played in something that is sort of AAA, but had to meet the requirements of a whole large audience. So, yeah.
And even, you know, and even like the moment that you see yourself in a portal, if you shoot the portal the right way, you know, for the first time, and you see who you are and who you're playing as, that moment is really powerful. The fact that it's, you know, Chell and GLaDOS, and that's it, you know, and you know, where are the dudes now? You know, it's like us digging it out. And then of course, you know, there's like an entire dissertation in the whole gendering of GLaDOS and all that jazz. There's like an entire PhD worth of that fun stuff. But you know, it's sort of, you know, little moments like that. The afternoon you might spend crying over Gone Home, and sort of the things like, you know, the moment that I picked up Borderlands and I was like, oh my gosh, I can play as her. I don't talk to her. I don't save her. That's, you know, those sort of small moments can also be really powerful. And hey, you know, Borderlands was, you know, like a AAA game, right? So it's entirely possible. I mean, the Tiny Tina DLC is fabulous. And there's a great quest line where Mr. Torg, who is this sort of like giant, you know, beefy, muscular guy that talks in expletives about explosions and everything, he wants to play the game because it's like a Dungeons and Dragons, you know, kind of like simulator or whatever. And he's like, I want to play the game. And then the girl says, you don't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons. You're just a fake geek, right? So it's this sort of, you know, big muscular guy, you know, this sort of big muscular guy talking about explosions, and he's sort of, you know, trying to prove his geek
He's
cred.
the Michael Bay of the
You know, yeah, he's the Michael Bay, and he's trying to, you know, prove his, you know, like that sort of storyline. And I was like, work, Gearbox, work, you know. So I was, you know, snaps to that, right? So whenever these conversations, you know, can actually make it into sort of real video games, that's awesome. Like that's happening, you know, to a smaller extent in AAA, but the indie game scene is really, really awesome. And, you know, Maddie Bryce, Annie Pixelani, right? Zoe Quinn, you know, like all sorts of people that you can look up. But, you know, when it comes to sort of being the change you wish to see in the world, how about this? I'm glad that you had a long, drawn-out conversation with that guy, instead of saying, ugh, whatever, you're hopeless, right? Like, I don't have the energy to do the feminism 101 thing for everybody, you know, because it just takes a lot of time, right? So, you know, like, thank you and thank other people, you know, that could take the time to be like, no, you know what, this is why these situations exist, right? And, you know, anytime that you can take some time out to do that, or at the very least just be like, hey dude, that's not cool, that's something you can do to change the landscape. So yeah.
I want to get some people in the back. First one, their hand up. One.
You guys have kind of danced around it a little bit. I'll stand up. But I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about rectifying games with uncomfortable political messages that are just really great games. Favorite game of the past year for me has probably been Dragon's Crown. But on the other hand, the people complained, and as a modern woman, I know I should be upset about their outfits, and especially about that guy who came out and was like, what's wrong? If you don't like it, you're gay. But that game was so fun. I had a great time, and if I stayed away from it politically, I would have missed out on that. So how do we rectify that with games that are really great, but not so great politically?
Well, it's, you know, one sort of interesting thing that happened, you know, when I kind of like went through my, you know, like major feminist revolution in undergrad, which is, you know, something that happens in undergrad. You know, I took my first women's studies class and I was like, oh, smash the patriarchy, right? And it kind of sucked because, right, you know, I was a rock musician. And I'm like, and then, as soon as you sort of do that and you look at, I'm like, I loved Poison. I liked Motley Crue. I looked at music videos and I went, oh my God. I've been consuming all of this objectifying media for so long, and I don't know what to do with myself. Like, I should only listen to Ani DeFranco, and well, not anymore. Whatever. I should only listen to like these specific acts, and that's it. And I should not consume any problematic media ever, right? The pendulum has sort of shifted. It's hard to sort of, I guess you could say, like, ignorance is bliss, right? Because you're like, when I didn't know anything about sort of gender and subjugation and all that fun stuff, I could play a game and not think about it and have that sort of magic there. The magic is still there, but you learn to sort of consume media, you can enjoy media because of what it particularly delivered for you, but you can also sort of acknowledge that it is problematic for certain reasons and be able to sort of have that kind of critical distance. It's a constant struggle, right? Because, I adore Borderlands, right? But then, somebody else on the kind of like feminist spectrum might be like, well, you're not a feminist because, look at Moxie, right? I love her. So, so there's this kind of, weird thing that happens. It's never easy. It's really, really messy to love something that is problematic. There's no answer for it, but it's sort of in, kind of being able to acknowledge it and know it and realize it and sort of really think critically about why it is that you enjoy what you enjoy.
There's a reason I call my game design practice critical gameplay. I think it's essentially just making sure that you have that critical distance. If you understand what you're doing and you're being critical of it on both ends, I think you're fine. Like, I think that's part of being a human being.
There's nothing to be gained from being in a bubble. I don't care if you're liberal, conservative, libertarian, progressive, whatever you are, engaging with things that you don't agree, that you do find problematic, and finding something in it that does compel you and helps you understand maybe why it is someone who is on the other side of things enjoys this or finds this titillating, exciting, intellectually stimulating that you don't, or maybe that you do. That's how you get personal growth.
Corner with the red hair.
So, all that being said, why do you think then that in a lot of ways the greater gaming culture, as much as that's a thing, is so resistant to that kind of examination of the things they like, when
because they just
being able to look at something that you like and say, yeah, I like playing this even though these parts are problematic, gets so much backlash from so many people who have to say, no, you can't say anything bad about this. Like, is it still some kind of leftover feeling of marginalization of the culture as a whole? Is that just so
it's defense. They're trying to defend.
You've answered it.
Yeah. It's we finally came into our own. We're finally kind of cool now, but we kind of hate the fact that we're cool now because now everybody else is trying to join the party, and that sucks. I mean, did I pretty much sum it up? I guess, right?
Because you get situations like, people defending, say, to go for the low-hanging fruit again, Grand Theft Auto, where you don't have to think that you need to outlaw those kinds of games to think that the fact that somebody on their programming team thought it was a good idea that being able to go pick up a hooker and then kill her as a game mechanic was a good idea.
Or have sex with what? Hot coffee, anybody?
But like, yeah.
So I'm a big fan, and this is risky to say, but I'm actually a big fan of a diverse ecosystem. And so I think that that diversity, I champion diversity at all ends of it, is important. So part of my research is I've published about taboo games, games that I think might be quite, and I showed you some of them, that are kind of reprehensible in their design, but I think they're important because they are a voice and because it's part of what we can respond to as designers. So I'm never a big fan of ostracizing anything.
But critiquing it, yes.
Being critical, absolutely.
Yeah,
everyone should be.
Yeah, and you know, so it's like, you know, the problem is that, you know, some people sort of make the giant leap by saying maybe it's not a good idea to, you know, to do this whole thing with the sex worker. Like that might, you know, like people take the leap, you know, from that to ban all of the games, you know, and like games can only have women in them, and you know, there no boobs allowed ever in the world of, like, you know, like people sort of like make that leap, right? It's like, I like boobs. Boobs are cool, you know, and I'm, you know, I'm kind of one of the people that I'm like, I like Moxie because she likes sex and she owns it, and it's like, yeah, girl, get it, you know, and you know, so you know, sometimes, you know, when they criticize a game, and it's like, no, you know,
we just got out of a war and we don't want to get back in one. You know, the Supreme Court violence ruling, you know, Schwarzenegger v. California or whatnot. You know, a lot of people feel like, well, we almost had game censorship and whatnot, and we won that, and so any kind of criticism, people get very defensive. You know, they go, no, we don't want to do this. We need to get out of this conflict mentality, you know, where everyone who criticizes games is an attack. I mean, not to drag in, like, you know, the most high-purpose names possible, but here we go. Nelson Mandela won. Winnie Mandela didn't. You know, the person who said, okay, we've gone beyond, you know, we can now make peace and talk this out, wins. The person who keeps fighting no matter what, you know, eventually the war is over.
Jim Sterling might have some words about that.
We've got time for just 2 more questions, and you 2 had your hands up, so I'm going to go you first, and then you. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, that kind of is a good segue into the question that I had, because it seems like, especially in a capitalist society where we kind of define ourselves based on the things that we like and things that we buy, I think that probably comes in a little bit with, you know, if somebody's objecting to something I like, that means they're objecting to me personally. And I was wondering if you thought that in a society like that, where that's a thing, does the political weight of any given game or media have more weight, or is that something that kind of carries across all cultures, where they might not define themselves so much based on the things that they purchase?
As the weight you give it.
Deep. I'm not a cultural anthropologist or sociologist, so I feel ill-equipped to answer it, but I would say that, again, to me it's about the critical distance we have. So we may identify with someone because they like the same sort of games we do, and we may champion them, but we should always take a critical distance and say, oh, that's just one attribute and a whole lot of other attributes. So a lot of the games I design are explicitly about this, and they're not well played, some of them at least, because these concepts seem so foreign when they're really not. And I would like, you know, there's a difference between capitalism and consumerism, and that consumerism thing is, I think, the one that really is sort of rife in a lot of our games. And the challenge for me is that I think people need to embrace the idea that everything is multidimensional in a way that we tend to want to, and I think movements in society have moved away from this. We tend to want to actually make things simpler and just say, okay, well that's a Grand Theft Auto person, and that's a Mortal Kombat person, and that's BS. I race cars and play artsy games, and I believe in the environment, but I also believe in fast cars. Like, people are complicated. Like,
yeah, and taste, you know, cultural capital, these are all sort of things that are, you know, they're social constructions, and it's kind of interesting, you know, that you could be like, I like Call of Duty, I like Battlefield, you suck. Versus, I'll take mine without tomato. Oh, I love tomatoes. That's cool, right? So, you know, it's kind of interesting how you know, that sort of identification happens. But, you know, it is, you know, I like this idea, critical distance, right? Sort of taking a step back and seeing that your identity is made up of thousands upon millions of interactions and little performance decisions every day, of which the game that you enjoy is merely one of them. And I think, you know, the more, you know, people start to see themselves as multifaceted people rather than as just a gamer or just an FPS chick or, you know, like all that stuff, I think, you know, it's
we'll
just,
get better.
Yeah, it gets better.
Okay, so last question, then we gotta call it a day.
Okay. So I'm a huge fan of Legend of Zelda. But it seems to me that narratively, the core narrative structure of the game has not changed much over the years. And we seem to have...
If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Hey man, let me finish. Alright, and so there seems to be like this codification of Zelda as powerless in the narrative. And I'm wondering, is the fact that that hasn't changed yet, is that political? If so, how and why?
For me, everything is political. Right? It's like, you know, it's the, you know, like the personal is political. I have a, you know, I would love to know the, you know, you just imagine the kind of storm of manure that would happen if all of a sudden it was like, you know, Link got trapped by something and then Zelda was like, huh, what? Oh, wait, my turn? All right, sick. And then, like, she went out and just, like kicked some butt.
It happened and it wasn't good.
It happened and it wasn't good? Is that what I'm hearing?
3DO games.
No, they happened twice. It happened twice.
One of the CDI games.
No, 2 CDI games. 2.
Oh, see?
2
It's gotta be good, right? It's gotta be good. So, you know, I think, you know, there is a lot of things sort of at play there, one of them being these sort of kind of like risk averse, you know, we don't want to do anything different because if we make a good game based on the previous narrative, you know, people will just eat it up and we'll make lots of money and that's awesome, right? So I think it has to do with, you know, the amount to which people want to risk doing something different for something that has been over 25 years old. I don't know. You have any thoughts?
Zelda's the one that gets saved because they were trying to make, Shigeru Miyamoto making Zelda, was trying to impose the barest minimum of a classical, you know, Western fairy tale narrative onto a game where you're trying to go from point A to point B and get object C. That is, I severely doubt he went in looking for a political message. He would probably blanch at the thought, if I know anything about the man. The fact that that is the default in the first place, that's what's political and social and going back through that whole thing. You know, culture changes, stories change. It takes time.
Okay. Anything else to contribute there? All right, so we've got to call it a day. But
After party in the brain space?
After party in brain space, which, if anyone doesn't know what brain space is for, it's for this to continue on all day. So it's right across the room. Anyone wants to continue talking, just go over there, start the talking.
What I was going to say was that I do,
oh, by the way,
on the second part
I usually cut this out, right?
I missed that. Did you record the whole thing?
Oh,